Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me for another Iron Age comic review. And today we're taking a look at Achromatic Chronicles Blue by Jay David. Now, I don't know much about Jay. I think he's a YouTuber. I heard about this project from A Drink with Crazy, which is a channel that primarily promotes independent projects. And this seemed pretty interesting, so I thought I would give it a look. And as you know, my format here is to give a look over of the project, in this case, the comic, as its physical qualities, how good the physical product is, and then talk about the art and the story. And then I'll give a final opinion and a recommendation to buy it or not buy it, followed by a deeper critique of the story itself, which will contain spoilers. Everything up to that point I will avoid spoilers. So there will be a clear delineation point if you just want to review. And if you're interested in some deeper thoughts on the story and the technique and the approach, I'll be discussing that eventually, but not right away. So right off the bat, this is a very good quality project. I think this is, it's a gloss paper, and it's not a very glossy paper. If you've watched any of these before for comics, you know I'm not a fan of very glossy paper. I consider that a plus. You can look at the art and get a pretty good sense of it without there being a strong glare from the page. I really like that. The binding is very nice. It's well stitched. It does not feel flimsy in spite of how thick the book is. This is a very thick book. I'd say there's probably around 150 to 160 pages here. There are no page numbers, which is a pet peeve of mine for indie comics, as I'm sure you're aware if you've watched these before. But in spite of this glaring oversight, it reads very well, and it's unless you're looking for a specific page, that's really not an issue. But again, it is something I would like to see in something like this. But if it's not there, it's not there. The art is by Lily Chan and Marinella Vina. I hope I pronounced that second name right. The art is kind of simplistic, and I should point out that this is a middle grade book, aimed at middle schoolers and preteens or older. And I think it's appropriate for that reading demographic. It reminds me kind of a cartoon or perhaps a storybook, but it has a little bit of layers and details to it. There are a lot of effects in here I like. There are panels. Let me see if I can find some examples of, like they use beta flashes and screen tones to good effect in panels like this, to add some texture and some depth without having to spend a lot of time on backgrounds. All in all, pretty good art. Nothing to write home about. There are occasionally panels like this one, where our hero gets slammed up against a locker, where the line work gets a little bit heavier to emphasize action and drama. And I think that's it's pretty good. Like there's nothing really complicated. There's not like big fight scenes or anything like that. There is a sequence with a monster at one point, but by and large, the art is simple and charming, but it's not going to set any kinds of records or anything. There are some really nice compositions. I like this page here, where we see our protagonist running, and he's just broken out of the panels that show the environments he's running through. Very nice, simple, but very effective visual storytelling mechanisms in many places in this book. Panel layouts are also a nice blend of very simple stuff that tells the story, combined with the occasional more complicated setup of panels, like you have this sequence here where our protagonist John finds Blue in the forest. That is, it's not just a set of panels. It does some interesting things with insets and stuff like that, that makes it read very well, but not get dull, so to speak. And there's not really a whole lot to say about the art beyond that, except I really appreciate some of the characters' designs, especially later in the story, where we have a number of literally more colorful characters show up. And I'll talk more about that in the spoiler section of my analysis. But for right now, I think the portrayal of most of the characters in here is interesting. And we'll segue from that into the story a bit, I guess. The core idea of Achromatic Chronicles is that John, our protagonist, lives in a world with no color, literally, and the goal of the people in this world is to keep things the same. And there's a great emphasis placed on sameness. I'm sorry if you're hearing a jet fly over my house. That's not a common occurrence, but there it is. There's a great emphasis placed on sameness and stasis as virtues in the world John lives in. And there are some interesting artistic tweaks to point that out. One obvious one is that John and all of his classmates at school wear uniforms, which is, a very easy, straightforward visual signifier of that concept. John's parents both dress the same way. They wear white button-up shirts and, gray slacks, although with different cuts slightly. His mother doesn't tuck her shirt in. His father does. So there are little, bits and pieces of difference between people. But for the most part, this idea of sameness plays very effectively on the page. And I like that. I like that there's a lot of visual storytelling emphasizing this particular theme. There are parts of the story that I feel are a little bit heavy-handed with this theme. And this is a story about growing up. It's a story about understanding who you are and how you are going to take your role in the world around you. It is a story about change, literally. And in many ways, the voices saying stay the same could be about society, and they could also be about the part of yourself that is afraid to grow up and change your role in the world. And I think that's a pretty interesting and important part of life for stories to grapple with, especially when they're aimed at middle grade readers. And the literal device for this is color. John lives in a monochromatic world, or an achromatic world, and he discovers the color blue, which is sentient, floats, flies, and speaks to him, and is really a very interesting way to show that John's life is beginning to change a little bit at a time. And I like the core idea. That's a great metaphor. It's not always deftly handled. I don't know if Jay is a professional writer, or if he's a critic, or if he's really studied the art of storytelling. I think he has great instincts, and he needs some refinement. The first quarter of this book is kind of weak, to be perfectly honest. If I were to go through and count how many different times the word different is used in this book, it's going to be pretty high. I haven't actually done that. It might be interesting to do that. But it's used a lot, and it feels like that the idea of being different as opposed to being the same is being leaned on way too hard. There's not a whole lot of metaphorical language beyond saying, well, you're different, things need to be the same, repeatedly. And I think that, there is a bully who bullies John for standing out, and I can understand that. And I understand we're dealing with kids, but some different metaphors and ideas for the concept of differentness and sameness beyond just the color metaphor would have been really nice. Now, as we get later in the story and things begin to unpack, and especially as blue begins to change the world, because it turns out that the color blue is hidden in this achromatic world. And when blue, the personified color, touches things that look gray but should be blue, he changes their colors. And that is a very interesting metaphor for change creeping in. I think that if some other metaphors for the idea of being the same or being different had been included in here, it would have been a much stronger story. Um, but I'm afraid I'm lapsing a little bit into the analysis part there. So let's just say I think that in the first part, the central concept is set up with a bit of a heavy hand, but it is developed in some very interesting ways. One thing I really liked is that Blue represents change. He represents growing up and into your proper place in the world. But unlike in a lot of stories like this, which you might find and read, Blue is not he is not a destroyer. He is a nurturer. He doesn't tell John that he should brush off his parents or stop doing his homework or any of the other things that a lot of modern middle grade media shows kids doing in order to find themselves. On the contrary, Blue advocates for being responsible, for trying to see your parents' side of things. He's a very nuanced character, although even Blue understands that this world probably needs color and change is a good thing, and John needs to figure out why he's different and what he's supposed to be doing. Blue also understands that parents are good for kids and things like that. I really like that kind of nuanced mentor figure, because giving simplistic dictums to kids is terrible kid storytelling. Kids, especially middle grade kids, are ready to start thinking about really complicated issues like balancing stasis and change, like being different and fitting in. And these are very difficult and nuanced subjects. They aren't going to figure them out overnight. They don't need fiction that says there's a pat answer. Like if somebody tells you to do something and it makes you unhappy, just tell them to blow off. That's not. They see that for what it is most of the time. They see that is shallow information. That's why they tend, I think, not to care much for kids' media, because a lot of kids' media is and always has been quite simplistic. So I think far and away, the relationship between Blue and John is the best part of this book. It shows a lot of the difficulties and nuances John has to navigate in being a good friend to this color, which he's never seen before, but seems very friendly to him, and in being a good son, being a good student, and being a good friend to his other friends. We know that John is part of a small circle at his school. We see all of them, but really only get more than one scene with one of them, who is a pretty important character in this first story, and seems to be the most important character to John in that circle. Maybe not. We'll see. But all in all, the central relationship between John and Blue really stood out to me as a good, healthy example of how friendships can help kids grow up, which is not something that I have seen in any middle grade media for a long time. So real props to Jay for that. I thought that was great writing. I also found that after I got through the first 20 pages or so, which I recognize is a big part, a big chunk of this story, I got much, much more invested in the story. I had originally intended to start this and read maybe the first half of it one night before I went to bed, and then finish it the next night again before I went to bed. And I found that as I reached the halfway point, I didn't want to stop, so I just finished it all in one sitting. The second half of this story really takes off, and it really flies. It introduces a lot of interesting tidbits about the world. We see the world Blue came from, a world with color, a world John has been dreaming about. A very fascinating relationship between that world and John's world. We're trying to figure out how these colors relate, what it means that blue transforms things from gray to blue when they're supposed to be blue. And that kind of implies that things have always been blue. So is he changing them? Is he not? I can see a lot of different ways this metaphor for changing and growing into yourself could be applied in this story. It was very exciting to start to see those threads take place and get woven together. It was exciting to see John exploring a world full of color and knowing what he actually looks like in color. Fascinating stuff, very well told at that point. So I think that this story, while its setup was kind of heavy-handed, is still worth looking at if you want a good kids comic with a nuanced sense of what the world is and how you should find your place in it. That shows really a healthy friendship, a couple of healthy friendships, rather than the very shallow and simplistic ones you see in a lot of kids' media. I liked this story. And the more I'm talking about it, the more I find myself liking it looking back at it. Very good. But, and this is a but, I don't know if you're not interested in stories with a lot of interesting symbolism and metaphor in them, or if you don't have a middle grade reader to share the story with, I don't know how interesting you'll find this story. This is definitely a middle grade book that will appeal to preteens and teenagers. I don't think that if you don't have a reader like that in your life, you will get as much value out of this. If you're not getting it for a niece or nephew or a child of your own, if you're not interested in writing this kind of story yourself, you may want to give this book a pass. I liked it, but story is what I do, and I'm always excited to see how people are tackling different kinds of stories. When I heard Jay pitch Royce this story as a way to use color as a metaphor, I was instantly interested in that as a concept, and I find the application fascinating and exciting for its own sake. I don't know if anyone else will. Unfortunately, that's when you're in the position of being a storyteller yourself, sometimes it's hard to take your interest, your professional interest in how a story is assembled, and separate it from how a reader who just wants to hear the story is going to take it. And I'm afraid Jay has really hit my personal sweet spot with the way he plays with color. So I think it's pretty good. And I do recommend it if you have middle grade readers you think would enjoy it, or if you are a story wonk like I am. Beyond that, I don't know as it really has a broad readership. But again, I'm not the best person to judge that, given the way I reacted to it while reading it. So that is the review. I give a qualified recommendation to pick it up. If you have a reader of the target audience in your house, I think they'll enjoy it. So let's talk spoilers. Let's look at the story a little bit deeper. There are a couple of major points that I think could use some work. One in world building, and one more in the nature of characters. So the first one, in terms of world building, as I said before, John lives in a world that is all about being the same. And people tell him, you gotta be the same because society, or you gotta be the same because this is how things are. And I can accept those answers most of the time for why this society is the way it is. You know, societies tend to ossify for very good reasons. Success breeds success. If you keep doing the same thing, you should be able to stay the same course. You know, that kind of thing. But usually, there's some kind of myth that springs up around this. Some kind of grand social story we tell ourselves that everyone understands is the basis for why you should stick with the tried and true. For example, you know, in America, you know, you want to stick with liberty, freedom, and, you know, the founding republic, because we have weathered and we have expanded all the way across the North American continent. We have weathered a great number of societal difficulties, and we've come through okay. You know, certainly there have been problems throughout the country's history, but we survived, we thrived many times, and while there have been downturns, as we are arguably in a downturn as of this recording, by sticking the course and staying with what we know works, we have come out ahead, and we have our founding fathers to point to. We have other heroes of our culture and our politics, and even local heroes like Anthony Wayne here in northern Indiana is a local hero most people probably don't know about. And I don't expect to have like that kind of rich and nuanced history in this story, but I kind of want to know what is the cultural myth that this culture has froze around. Does it have to do with why everything is in black and white? Or I can't just see people saying forever and a day, stay the same because staying the same is good. Because we said so. There should be at least one person out there who can show me the grand plan behind all this. And we don't actually get that. The principal of John's school, in fact, says he used to be like John, and he used to think change could be a good thing, but eventually he realized he needed to stay the same as his father and become the principal of the school. And that was a great opportunity to show us that cultural monomyth, the idea that all of these people have united around it makes them so much the same. And there wasn't anything there. I don't know if Jay has an idea for that he's going to share with us in a later story. I would have really liked to see it in this book if there isn't an idea like that. Or if there was an idea like that, I would like to see it in this book. I'm going to replay that for a second there. If there isn't an idea like that, I would encourage Jay to add it and share it with us at some point, because that makes the world feel more believable. I understand that when you're told, just suck it up and fit in with everyone around you, generally people don't have a well-reasoned idea of their place in culture and society that would make fitting in a good idea. But there should be someone out there ready to make that case to us, the readers, in order to buy that someone is making this society stick together around something. Societies don't just freeze in place without a myth, some kind of cultural touchstone to unite around. And I think there is some hints at that. We'll get to that in a second. So the second thing that I specifically want to say is that we know John has a circle of friends, and I would have liked to see more of them in here. We are told that John is close friends with 4 other people. We see his friendship with one of them. In fact, it's a central part of the conflict in the second half of this story, and it's a very good, believable relationship. I would have liked to see a little bit more of John's friendship with other people, just so we have a broader context for what kind of person he is with his friends. We mostly see John in tension with other people. He has a bully he has to deal with. His teachers and the principal don't like him. His parents are disappointed in him. And these are all understandable struggles for a middle school age kid. But I would have liked to see him in the healthy, good environment that he clearly has, because John is a pretty good, well-adjusted kid, all things considered. And I would have liked to see him in some of that more positive context in this story, just so we have a better understanding of what grounds him and makes him who he is. Because we really see his positive relationships just with his, and I've forgotten her name, his friend, let me get the name. And we also see him, being a good friend with Blue Fortuna. That's it. So we see him having a good relationship with his friend Fortuna and with Blue. Now, Blue is a new person in his life, so that doesn't really inform who John was before he met Blue, or before his story begins here. So having some more of that background on who he was before the story started would have been nice. As I said before, I think John's relationship with Blue, and even his relationship with his parents and Fortuna's father and the principal, all show a lot of care and thought and nuance and how people need to consider one another while changing their place in society and going through these really monumental changes that you have in your teenage years as you grow into an adult. So mad props to that. One thing that happens later in the story that I really enjoyed is we're introduced to this pirate gang, and I want to give the artist some real credit. Outside of the achromatic world, we get all these goofy and wild and really fun-looking characters. They have colorful dress. There's lots of weird and wild shapes in their character designs. They're fun to look at. The captain of the pirates is Bluebeard. Hopefully, he does not murder his wife, like the certain other Bluebeards do. He has a great character design. I really enjoyed that. John goes to an island where there's a monster that can kill colors and has, in fact, destroyed a color in the colorful world, which is another fascinating idea that I really want to see expanded on. I hope to find out what color this monster destroyed. The monster design is brilliant. It's kind of like, it reminds me a little bit of Pride from Full Metal Alchemist. It's kind of a creature of shadow and eyes, except it has like an actual physical body as well, or at least it seems to. There's a lot of great visuals. There's a lot of great story hooks in the second half of the story. And at the end, we have a huge, huge hook for further installments in the Achromatic Chronicles, because John decides to go for broke and show that Glassberry, the town he lives in, that change can be good. So he and Blue go up, and they turn the sky blue. And that's a wow. What a great ending for a story and hook for the further adventures of these kids who are learning what it means to deal with a world in color. Great stuff. A great ending note. And I think more, as much as anything, it was that last page that made me certain that I needed to read the second book. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. This is a very long book, so I don't know, how long the downtime is going to be. But I do have a lot of praise for the care and the nuance put into trying to give kids things to think about. It's not so much about having role models, which is, a kind of storytelling for kids and a good kind of storytelling for kids. But this is a story about thinking about what you can do and how that fits into the world you're in. And kids get so few stories that are about that. And this story, the way it's constructed, the way it wants kids to think about questions and where lines are and what those lines mean, and what it means to grow into yourself. Are you changing things? Are you discovering something that was always there? Great concepts, and Jay puts them in front of the reader without rubbing the reader's face in answers to any of these questions. I like it. I like that very deft and nuanced handling of, admittedly, the 3/4 of the story, because I do feel the opening is a bit heavy-handed, and I hope we will see a lot more of the end, the 3/4 of the tail end of the story, and maybe we can ease up on the kind of writing we saw in the first quarter of the story. All in all, a good book. And I hope that if Jay ever sees this and here's my feedback, he'll find something constructive there that he can incorporate into his writing for further books. Anyway, those are my thoughts on this. If you've read it, let me know what you're thinking down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.